For years, Mark Wahlberg represented one of Hollywood's most celebrated reinvention stories. He was framed as the ultimate comeback figure, a troubled kid from Boston who escaped his past, built discipline, and turned raw ambition into lasting success. That narrative followed him everywhere, from interviews to marketing campaigns, until the internet began to challenge whether that redemption story was complete or even deserved. Wahlberg was born in 1971 and grew up in Dorchester, a working-class neighborhood in Boston. His early life was chaotic, shaped by poverty, family instability, and constant exposure to street violence. By his own admissions over the years, he was involved in drugs, crime, and repeated encounters with the law before reaching adulthood. Long before fame, his name already appeared in police reports, not tabloids. This context matters because the foundation of his later legend was built on the idea that he escaped a destructive environment and chose a different path. In the late 1980s, Wahlberg found his first escape route through music. As Marky Mark, he became part of the group Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, breaking into mainstream pop culture almost overnight. The success was immediate and massive. His image, shirtless, aggressive, hyper-confident, was everywhere. Music videos, magazine covers, commercials. For a brief moment, he was not just popular, but culturally dominant. Even when the music faded, his visibility did not. That visibility transitioned smoothly into acting. Unlike many musicians turned actors, Wahlberg did not stall in novelty roles. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, he steadily built credibility, taking parts that distanced him from his pop persona. Films like Boogie Nights reframed him as a serious performer rather than a celebrity experiment. Over time, he became known for intense preparation, physical discipline, and a relentless work ethic. Directors described him as dependable. Studios saw him as bankable. Audiences accepted him as authentic. By the 2000s, Wahlberg's transformation was complete in the public eye. He was no longer Marky Mark. He was a legitimate Hollywood star and later a producer behind successful franchises. His story fit perfectly into the American redemption myth: early mistakes followed by growth, accountability, and reinvention. Interviews often framed his past as a cautionary tale rather than an unresolved issue. The narrative was simple and effective. He had paid his dues. He had moved on. What was less discussed during this period were the specific violent incidents from his teenage years that had resulted in criminal charges. These events were not rumors or internet speculation. They were documented assaults motivated by racial hostility, including attacks on black children and later assaults against Vietnamese American men in the late 1980s. Wahlberg was convicted for at least one of these incidents and served jail time. At the time, the story did not follow him into the mainstream entertainment conversation. It existed, but it did not define him. For decades, that history remained largely compartmentalized. It surfaced occasionally in print interviews or background profiles, but rarely shaped how he was discussed publicly. His success, discipline, and philanthropy dominated the conversation instead. Hollywood, like most industries, often prioritizes present value over past context. As long as Wahlberg delivered consistent box office returns and avoided new scandals, the narrative remained intact. That balance shifted dramatically in the mid-2010s. In 2014, Wahlberg applied for a pardon related to his earlier conviction. His stated reasoning focused on clearing his record, restoring civil rights, and closing a chapter he believed he had already paid for. What followed was not quiet legal consideration, but a public reckoning. The internet responded immediately, not by examining his career, but by resurfacing the details of the original crimes. Articles circulated, social media threads exploded, context collapsed into headlines. For many people encountering the story for the first time, Wahlberg was no longer a symbol of redemption. He became a test case. Could someone truly move on from racially motivated violence? Did success and time outweigh harm? Was seeking a pardon an act of closure or an attempt to erase accountability? These questions were no longer academic. They were public, emotional, and deeply polarized. The shift was subtle but permanent. Wahlberg's career did not collapse. His films continued. His businesses expanded. But the tone of the conversation around him changed. Every new appearance, award mention, or promotional interview now carried an invisible footnote. The internet had not canceled him outright, but it had reframed him. The legend narrative was no longer uncontested. This was not a traditional downfall. There was no single viral moment, no dramatic apology tour, no sudden disappearance. Instead, It marked the beginning of a split legacy, one defined by professional success and unresolved moral debate. Wahlberg remained powerful within the industry, but increasingly controversial outside it, and once that door opened, it never fully closed. By the time he withdrew the pardon request, the damage, or depending on perspective, the correction, was already done. The internet had decided that his past was not finished with him, and from that point forward, every conversation about his legacy would be forced to live in that tension. Once the story entered the internet's permanent memory, it stopped being about a single decision or legal filing. It became about how public perception works in the digital age. For decades, fame operated on selective memory. Studios, magazines, and interviews controlled which parts of a person's story were emphasized and which quietly faded. The internet changed that balance completely. It does not forget, and it does not prioritize growth over record. It prioritizes accessibility. What made the backlash different was timing. The events from his teenage years were not new information, but they became newly visible to a generation that had only known him as a successful actor and businessman. For many people, the first exposure to his name was through films, not headlines. When the old reports resurfaced, they collided directly with the polished image that had been built over decades. That collision is where the narrative fractured. Online discussion does not unfold slowly. It compresses decades into minutes. Nuance disappears as context is reduced to screenshots and summaries. In this environment, intent matters less than impact, and chronology matters less than visibility. The question was no longer whether he had changed, but whether change itself was enough. That distinction fueled endless debate, not just about him, but about how society measures accountability. Some defended the idea of rehabilitation. They pointed to the time that had passed, the absence of repeat offenses, and the consistent professional behavior that followed. They argued that if transformation is not recognized, then the concept of redemption becomes meaningless. From this perspective, his life after those incidents mattered more than the incidents themselves. Others rejected that framing entirely. They argued that violence motivated by race cannot be treated as a youthful mistake that fades with success. They questioned whether wealth and status shielded him from scrutiny that others would never escape. For this group, the pardon request symbolized an imbalance of power, not closure. To them, the issue was not punishment, but acknowledgement and lasting responsibility. What made the situation particularly volatile was that both sides believed they were arguing from principle. This was not gossip-driven outrage. It was a collision between two value systems, one centered on personal change, the other on historical accountability. Social media platforms amplified the conflict because they reward certainty, not complexity. Posts that framed the situation as black and white traveled faster than those that tried to hold multiple truths at once. Meanwhile, his professional life continued almost unaffected. Film roles did not disappear. Producing credits increased, business ventures expanded. This contrast, online outrage alongside uninterrupted success, further fueled resentment. To critics, it looked like proof that consequences were optional for the powerful. To supporters, it looked like evidence that the industry judged him on current reliability rather than past actions. This is where the idea of the internet turning on someone becomes misleading. It was not a single unified audience. It was a fragmented public reacting at different speeds, with different priorities. Some people disengaged entirely, reminders of his past surfaced. Others doubled down on defending him. Many simply carried on watching his work while acknowledging discomfort. The shift was not a collapse, but a permanent complication. Over time, the discourse settled into a pattern, and his name became a recurring flashpoint during moments of visibility, award seasons, major releases, interviews about faith or discipline. Each resurfacing followed the same cycle: rediscovery, outrage, defense, fatigue, then silence. Until the next trigger. This cycle did not require his participation. It functioned independently of his actions. What is notable is how little he addressed the controversy publicly after the initial period. There was no sustained attempt to reshape the narrative through media appearances or statements. Whether intentional or strategic, this silence allowed the conversation to exist without resolution. The internet filled the gap with its own interpretations. This dynamic reveals something broader about modern celebrity. Fame today is not just about performance or output, it is about archives. Past behavior can re-emerge at any moment, reframed for a new audience with new expectations. Growth is not erased, but neither is history. Both exist simultaneously, often without reconciliation. By the late 2010s, his public image had effectively split in two. In professional spaces, he was seen as disciplined, reliable, and commercially viable. In online discourse, he became a symbol in a larger conversation about whether time and success should soften judgment. Neither version replaced the other. They coexist. The internet did not strip him of influence or opportunity. What it removed was narrative control. The legend was no longer singular, it was contested, and once that contest began, it could not be closed by achievements alone. This tension between personal reinvention and public memory would go on to define how he is discussed moving forward, not as a fallen star, but as a reminder that some pasts never stop being present, no matter how far someone appears to have moved beyond them. By the time the conversation around Mark Wahlberg settled into its long-term shape, something important had already changed. His career trajectory and his public perception were no longer moving together. In earlier decades, controversy could derail momentum or force reinvention. In this case, momentum continued, but perception fractured. That separation is what defines the final phase of his story. Professionally, he never disappeared. His output remained steady. He continued leading films, producing commercially successful projects, and expanding into business ventures that reinforced his image as disciplined and structured. From an industry standpoint, he remained dependable. Hollywood values consistency, and by every measurable metric, attendance, financing, production schedules, he provided it. The industry did not relitigate his past because industries rarely do. They assess present risk. Public discourse, however, operates on a different logic. It is not transactional, it is symbolic. Over time, Wahlberg's name became less about individual projects and more about what he represented in cultural arguments. He was no longer discussed only as an actor. He became a reference point. His story was used to argue about forgiveness, privilege, justice, and whether growth should ever neutralize harm. What complicates this further is that there was no single conclusion. Unlike public figures who issue repeated apologies, retreat from visibility, or reposition themselves as activists, Wahlberg largely stayed in his lane. He worked. He avoided extended commentary. He did not attempt to control the narrative through constant explanation. That choice kept the focus on the facts rather than performance, but it also left the debate unresolved. In unresolved debates, repetition replaces closure. Each new generation encountering his work online experiences the story as if it is new. For someone discovering his films for the first time, the contrast between the polished professional image and the resurfaced history can feel jarring. That shock renews the cycle. The past is not reintroduced as background, it arrives as revelation. This is where the idea of legacy becomes unstable. Traditionally, legacy was shaped over time through retrospectives, awards, and long-form biographies. Today it is shaped through search results, trending topics, and algorithmic memory. A career can be long, successful, and uninterrupted, while still carrying a permanent asterisk in the public imagination. Wahlberg's legacy now exists in layers. One layer is industry-facing, a figure who turned discipline into longevity and built influence behind the camera. Another layer is audience-facing, a familiar presence whose work is often consumed alongside discomfort or debate. A third layer is symbolic, a case study in how the internet revisits history without expiration dates. Importantly, none of these layers cancel the others. They coexist. That coexistence is the story's conclusion, not resolution. He was not erased, nor fully absolved. He was reframed. This reframing reflects a broader shift in how society treats time. In the past, distance softened judgment. Today, distance merely delays rediscovery. The internet collapses timelines, placing teenage actions next to adult success without transition. In that environment, personal change is real, but public acceptance is conditional and fragmented. For Wahlberg, this means that no future achievement will fully overwrite the conversation. At the same time, no past controversy has stopped his forward motion. That tension is not unique to him, but his visibility makes it clearer. He illustrates how fame in the digital era does not end careers as often as it complicates them. In the end, the title of legend still applies, but not in the uncomplicated way it once did. He is a legend of reinvention, discipline, and persistence, but also a reminder that redemption narratives are no longer owned by the individual telling them. They are negotiated in public, continuously, without a final verdict. The internet did not destroy his career. It changed the terms under which his career is interpreted. That distinction matters. One is punishment, the other is permanence. And that may be the defining lesson of his story. In a world where nothing truly disappears, success does not erase history. It only places it under brighter light.